Imagine a military giant, literally handcuffed for decades by a massive reliance on foreign weapons. Now, imagine that same giant suddenly deciding to completely rewrite its destiny and build its own formidable arsenal from scratch. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're decoding a massive transformation happening right now on the global stage, India's strategic defense awakening. We are just looking at dry policies today. We're looking at how a nation fundamentally re-engineers its entire security architecture from the ground up.
It brings us to a really profound, real-world question. Can a nation be truly sovereign if it relies on others to defend it? Think about it. If your borders are protected by tanks, jets, and missiles manufactured thousands of miles away by foreign governments who ultimately control the supply chains and the spare parts, well, your strategic autonomy is always going to be on a leash. This is the exact vulnerability India is urgently trying to solve right now. To master this complex shift, we've got a clear roadmap for us to follow. We're going to cover the major shift from buyer to builder, how they're driving indigenous manufacturing, those new invisible frontiers in cyber and space, a reality check on some critical gaps that still exist, the geopolitical chessboard, and finally a quick concept mastery revision. So, the shift from buyer to builder. To truly understand where India is heading, we first have to establish the baseline of where it's been. For decades, India's approach to military modernization was pretty straightforward. Just buy the best equipment available on the global market. But, as you'll see, that strategy came with an incredibly hefty hidden cost. And that hidden cost was staggering. Between 2018 and 2022, India alone accounted for 11% of all global arms imports. That made India the single largest importer of major arms in the entire world during that period. Now put that into perspective. India was the world's fourth largest defense spender in 2023. But when the massive bulk of that budget is just being sent overseas to buy foreign tech, it severely undermines strategic autonomy. Because when the chips are down in a crisis, you literally cannot afford to be waiting for an import shipment just to defend your borders. But then, the post-pandemic era marked a total paradigm shift. Imports haven't just slowed down, they've actually plateaued. And simultaneously, we are seeing this wildly impressive upward trajectory in domestic defense exports. India is no longer just absorbing global technology, it's actively beginning to produce and push cost-effective, high-quality weaponry outward. This dual trend, it's a massive milestone in its modernization journey. Driving indigenous defense manufacturing. So how exactly does a massive, traditionally slow, bureaucratic defense apparatus turn the ship around? You don't just wake up one morning and start building fighter jets. It requires absolutely ruthless policy mechanisms to actually drive this kind of indigenous manufacturing. Think of this entire process as a forced innovation system. The government introduced something called positive indigenization lists, and here's exactly how the system works. First, the military identifies a capability gap. Second, they place specific weapons or systems on this list. Third, and this is the really aggressive part, they slap a strict deadline on it, after which importing that item is completely banned, no exceptions. Finally, this literally forces the domestic industry to scale up and fill the void. They've already rolled out 5 of these lists, systematically replacing foreign reliance with high-quality domestic engineering. And the financial impact of this forced innovation? It's huge. 35,000 crore rupees. That is the extremely aggressive defense export target set for the year 2025. And this isn't just wishful thinking. It's backed up by heavy-hitting policies. The Defense Acquisition Procedure of 2020 legally mandates the prioritization of domestic procurement. At the very same time, initiatives like the IDEX scheme are actively rewiring the whole ecosystem, funding startups and innovators to spark genuinely globally competitive technologies. But let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture here. This domestic push isn't just about weapons, right? It's a massive economic engine. The establishment of defense industrial corridors in Tamil Nadu and Uttar Pradesh shows how defense manufacturing is being used for regional capacity building. Major industry titans like L&T are setting up massive manufacturing units right in these corridors. So this creates jobs, it fuels regional innovation, and it's directly responsible for recent breakthroughs in missile technology and tactical systems that seriously enhance India's overall deterrence. Which brings us to the new frontiers, cyber and space. Because protecting physical borders with domestically built missiles, well, that's really only half the battle. We have to look at the invisible front lines. Modern warfare is entirely digital. As India's defense infrastructure becomes more technologically advanced, it becomes incredibly reliant on digital systems and space-based assets. Naturally, this exposes critical networks to emerging cyber threats. Enter CERT-IN, the national nodal agency tasked with shielding these highly sensitive networks. Now, while these initiatives show India is absolutely integrating space and cybersecurity into its defense strategy, the reality is that readiness in these non-traditional domains still trails behind global peers like the US. And honestly, that brings us to a very necessary pivot in our analysis. The reality check. Critical gaps. We've seen the impressive upward trajectory, sure, but we need to take a hard, objective look at the systemic vulnerabilities that still threaten this entire transformation. Let's systematically map out these roadblocks. First up, the budget. Yes, it's increasing, but it's heavily skewed toward revenue expenditure, meaning it's mostly going to salaries and pensions. That leaves a painfully limited slice of the pie for actual high-tech modernization. Second, bureaucratic inefficiencies. These continue to cause severe, real-world delays in acquiring what the military actually needs on the ground. Third, a significant portion of the current inventory remains outdated, which directly compromises combat readiness. And finally, the lack of a joint command structure. Without a unified command, the Army, Navy, and Air Force struggle with interoperability. It's essentially like an orchestra trying to play a complex symphony without a conductor. But perhaps the most alarming roadblock to true strategic autonomy is this single number right here, less than 1%. That is the tiny fraction of India's defense budget that actually goes toward research and development. This is significantly lower than global standards. Look, you can ban imports and force domestic production all day long, but if you don't have a robust indigenous R&D ecosystem to design the next generation of technology from scratch, your technological independence has a very, very hard ceiling. Which brings us to the human element behind that R&D gap. While defense production hit a record 1.27 lakh crore rupees recently, the workforce itself just isn't evolving fast enough. There is a critical shortage of skilled personnel in the exact fields that dictate the future of war. We're talking robotics, artificial intelligence, and precision manufacturing. Without this specialized talent, the domestic manufacturing ecosystem is going to seriously struggle to match global innovation standards, especially when we're talking about highly complex, critical tech like jet engines and advanced sensors. The geopolitical chessboard. Why do all of these domestic vulnerabilities matter so urgently right now? Because, of course, India does not exist in a vacuum. It is operating on a highly volatile, constantly shifting geopolitical chessboard. Just look at the geopolitical tightrope India is currently walking. On one side, the northern strain, the historical reliance on Russian arms creates massive diplomatic friction and severe supply chain risks, especially as U.S.-Russia tensions continue to escalate. On the flip side, you have the maritime strain. China is aggressively expanding its naval presence in the Indian Ocean, directly threatening regional maritime security. To counter this, India is heavily focused on strengthening its own naval power and anti-piracy capabilities to protect its interests in the Indo-Pacific. It is a constant, incredibly high-stakes balancing act of robust diplomacy and urgent defense upgrading. Final revision. Concept mastery. We have covered a massive amount of strategic ground today, from import dependency to the forced innovation of domestic manufacturing, all the way to those critical gaps that still remain. Now let's consolidate this to ensure you walk away from this explainer with complete concept mastery. Let's lock these memory anchors in. If you really want to understand India's defense shift, remember these exact mechanisms. DAP 2020, that's the legal framework prioritizing buying at home. IDEX is the financial spark for startups to build globally competitive tech. The indigenization lists are the aggressive tool banning imports to literally force domestic scaling. CERT-IN is the shield guarding those invisible cyber and space front lines. And Joint Command, that is the critical missing link needed to make the Army, Navy, and Air Force fight as one cohesive unit. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. The transformation from a dependent buyer to a self-reliant builder is undoubtedly underway, and the export numbers absolutely prove it. But looking at the massive challenges on the horizon, can India bridge its critical 1% R&D gap and overcome its deep-rooted bureaucratic bottlenecks before the next major geopolitical crisis strikes the Indo-Pacific? The policies are in place, the manufacturing corridors are built, but the clock on the global chessboard is always ticking. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing the facts and never stop questioning the bigger picture.